Associate Professor Jamus Lim.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this latest ministerial statement, which details additional COVID-19 related financial measures, does much to shore up the most affected sectors of our economy. And there's certainly more that can be done to offer short-term transitional support that the most vulnerable segments, especially displaced workers and those operating in the F&B and hospitality sectors, along with our local SMEs, as my Sengkang colleagues Louis Chua and He Ting-Ru have pointed out. I wish to focus instead on the longer-term elements of the statement, especially surrounding Singa. I will pose 3 questions about spending reallocation, a timeline for bond issuance, and a scheme for income contingent student loans. My first question has to do with better understanding why the government has decided to reallocate development expenditure from an underutilized budget, instead of accelerating spending so that projects may be completed according to the original timeline. Specifically, why not fund the delayed 0.6 billion directly from more Singa borrowing instead? After all, we should recognize that the delayed 0.6 billion in development expenditure has an opportunity cost in terms of foregone benefits from these capital projects. If we truly believe that the benefits of our development expenditures have not been irrevocably altered by pandemic-related delays, and I believe this should always be the case for long-term capital projects, then we should be working hard to get these delayed projects back on track by boosting immediate spending, rather than passively accepting the delay. This will also allow the revenue streams associated with projects to accrue sooner. Moreover, doing so would not only ease the restraints on the supply side, it would also serve to strengthen the demand side in the hard-hit construction sector, still among our hardest hit, having shrunk 11% in the second quarter, which would undoubtedly benefit from a short-term expenditure boost. And of course, this is not an abstract cost existing only on paper. I have many residents whose living situations have been significantly compromised by the delay in the expected handover dates of their BTO flats. Could we not accelerate our spending, temporarily increase our inputs, so that the construction of these flats do not face an inordinate delay? Now, to be entirely fair, in our conversations with our contacts in the construction sector, they have shared that the ability to ramp up activity has been constrained not just by demand limitations, but also those of supply. Construction raw material prices, like those of all commodities, have increased sharply worldwide. This spike has further been exacerbated by US infrastructure building, Chinese restrictions on material export, and difficulties in procuring Malaysian manufactured materials due to its shutdown. But activity has also been curtailed by some of our own policy decisions, which have served to dampen demand in the sector. While we have attempted to relax some of the immigration controls, they remain comparatively restrictive, and our friends in the industry share that this remains their most binding constraint. Thus, while we recognize the importance of exercising caution to limit imported cases, as well as the longer-run need to transition away from low-cost labor in the construction sector, as my Aljunied colleague Jarugiam will share, there is, in the meantime, an immediate need to relieve labor needs on this front. Moreover, we know that well-executed quarantine procedures have proven their worth in containing spread along this channel. Will the government be willing to offer an update on their plans in restarting our inflow of foreign workers in this sector and the accompanying measures for managing imported cases? Furthermore, mandatory quarantine, routine testing, and safe distancing measures all have added to costs, which inevitably renders some projects no longer economically viable. Could some of these overheads be partially offset by the government to help the sector as it tries to get back on its feet? And ultimately, the surfeit of projects could potentially have lasting consequences. Our sources also report that skilled workers are leaving, hollowing out a sector already struggling with low productivity. Another important question, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to inquire about whether the government has a detailed plan for upcoming Singapore bond issuance, or if it plans to dip into markets on a more ad hoc basis. More pointedly, are the deep tunnel, sewage system, and north-south corridor the only projects that can be brought forward to be capitalized now? I will contend that we require not just a clear, if amendable, issuance timeline, but also one that is front-loaded as much as possible. After all, it is useful to keep in mind that low interest rates will not remain with us indefinitely. Between the start of this year till the end of the first quarter, the US long-term interest rate almost doubled from 0.9 to 1.7%. This rate remained elevated through most of the second quarter before easing significantly to around 1.3% in more recent times. Surveys of market forecasters suggest that the rise in rates through mid-2022 may only be slightly higher than 2%. On its face, then, it may seem like we have ample time to return to markets for our future infrastructure borrowing needs. But markets are unlikely to remain quiescent forever. Indeed, a more careful consideration of the underlying components of long-term yields reveals that since mid-May this year, the real long-term interest rate, that is, the true underlying cost of capital, began to rise. What this means, in practical terms, is that as markets normalize, surplus capital is beginning to be dissipated. Once this process takes hold, we should expect a more decisive climb in the observed long-term interest rate. As I previously documented in my two prior parliamentary interventions on the issue, one of the main advantages underlying SINGA is the ability to lock in current low financing costs for long-term projects that we fully expect to realize. And that will disappear, or at least face a much higher hurdle rate to justify the debt incurred if we do not seize the day. Put another way, once interest rates begin an inexorable climb, many projects will no longer be economically justifiable. If so, we may inadvertently end up significantly undershooting the approved SINGA loan limit of 90 billion and all the benefits associated thus. Madam Deputy Speaker, I had also previously flagged a number of potential projects on the human capital side that could be considered under SINGA. If I may indulge this opportunity to elaborate on just one suggestion, could we consider dedicating a part of SINGA financing to fund an initial pool of income contingent repayment student loans? I should also add, before I proceed further, that I am an educator at an institute of higher learning. Now, to reiterate, the idea is to use SINGA to seed a fund for income contingent loans. The government commits to fund all the costs of tertiary or continuing education programs up front, perhaps subject to a very, very modest co-payment as collateral. As the graduate secures a job, and contingent on them earning enough, the recipient would then pay off the acquired debt. To maximize repayment probabilities, we could limit at the outset the scheme only to courses with a clear economic need, such as information and computer science, biopharmaceutical sciences, and digital and social media marketing, among others. Just as important, such loans stand apart from Skills Future because it will cover the full costs of an extended training program. It will also not be constrained by the need to identify employer matches, as the work-study degree program is, and it is meant to be accessible to young college-age students rather than mainly targeted at reskilling displaced workers. Such schemes already exist elsewhere in the world. In the United Kingdom, the government-run student loans company operates several plans where incomes must cross a fixed weekly or monthly threshold before loan repayment deductions are made. In the United States, various permutations of the program have been proposed and implemented since 1971, enjoying bipartisan support, and has been championed most recently by the Institute for College Access and Success. Australia, Hungary, New Zealand, the Netherlands, and South Korea have all introduced various variations of the scheme. Importantly, such a program in the local context will also free parents of tertiary students from the perceived need to finance their children's university education, especially when their parents' CPF are already stretched in terms of meeting retirement needs, and all the more by the income shocks endured during the pandemic. The risks of repayment would be transferred to the main beneficiaries of this human capital investment, the undergraduates themselves, while being underwritten by the government. Since human capital investments as a whole pay off in the long run, such an investment is eminently suitable for funding via the long-term bond issuance under the auspices of Singer. And most importantly, surely nobody can credibly argue that education should not be considered infrastructure in our 21st century economy. Notwithstanding these three questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, I support the statement.